The moment she screamed, "Arrest him! He's trespassing!" I realized the biggest mistake that HOA would ever make had already happened. The sharp crackle of a police radio cut through the quiet morning air just as I stepped through the old cedar gate my father had built with his own hands 30 years earlier. Fresh-cut grass carried the sweet scent of summer across the ranch, mixing with the faint aroma of black coffee still warming in the travel mug sitting on the hood of my dusty pickup. Gravel crunched beneath my boots as two sheriff's deputies climbed out of their cruisers, their emergency lights washing blue and red across the weathered fence posts that had marked my property line longer than most of the houses surrounding it had existed. Across the road, Linda Whitmore stood with both hands planted on her hips like she personally owned every acre within sight. Her designer sunglasses reflected the flashing lights, while her perfectly pressed white blazer somehow looked untouched by the Texas heat. Behind her, half a dozen HOA board members gathered with their phones already recording, whispering to one another with the confidence of people who believe the ending had already been written in their favor. Linda pointed directly at me before either deputy managed to say a single word. "That's him. He cut through our community entrance again. He refuses to obey HOA rules. He's been warned. He's trespassing on association property." The accusation hung in the air for a moment so absurd that even the breeze seemed to stop moving. I glanced at the faded brass key resting in my palm, the same heavy key my father had handed me years ago with a quiet smile and one simple sentence. "A man never forgets the gate that leads home." That old key had opened this gate thousands of times. Today it would end up opening something much larger. One deputy approached carefully, professional but cautious, while the younger one studied the paperwork Linda eagerly shoved into his hands. She had prepared color-coded maps, violation notices, highlighted bylaws, even photographs showing me walking across my own gravel drive. Every page seemed designed to transform an ordinary homeowner into a criminal. Linda's voice grew louder with every sentence, feeding off the attention gathering from curious neighbors now lining their porches with coffee cups and folded arms. "He thinks the rules don't apply to him," she declared. "People like him always believe they're above the law." I looked around without saying a word. My eyes lingered on the security camera tucked beneath the barn roof, its tiny green light blinking steadily. Then I noticed another camera mounted beside the entrance gate. Linda had insisted the HOA install that one only 3 weeks earlier. I remembered smiling when they did. Sometimes people spend thousands of dollars collecting evidence against themselves without ever realizing it. "Sir," the older deputy finally said, his tone calm and respectful, "we received a complaint that you entered private HOA property after being formally prohibited." I nodded once and answered quietly, "I understand why you're here, deputy." Linda folded her arms with obvious satisfaction, convinced silence meant surrender. She had spent months building this moment piece by piece, adding fake authority to every conversation until even she believed it. What she didn't know was that I had spent those same months watching every decision, every email, every recorded meeting, every document she proudly signed. She believed today would end with me sitting in the back of a patrol car. Instead, before the week was over, every signature she had ever placed on behalf of that HOA would become evidence in a courtroom she never imagined she would enter. Nobody in Willow Creek Estates knew anything about the man who lived beyond the old Cedar Gate, and I intended to keep it that way. My name is Nathan Carter. I was 51 years old, and for the first time in more than 2 decades, my mornings belonged to nobody except me. Every sunrise began the same way. I would unlock the weathered gate with my father's brass key, listen to the familiar click of the worn mechanism, and walk the fence line with a cup of black coffee while dew soaked the toes of my work boots. The ranch covered just over 40 acres, enough room for silence to feel like an old friend, instead of an empty space. My father had bought the land after returning home from military service, spending nearly 30 years repairing fences, planting oak trees, and building every structure himself. He believed that ownership was not measured by paperwork alone. It was measured by every early morning, every blister, every repaired hinge, and every promise kept. After he passed away, I inherited everything exactly as he had left it, including the simple instruction never to let anyone convince me that convenience was worth more than principle. My professional life existed almost entirely outside this quiet place. Monday through Friday, I wore tailored suits, reviewed legal briefs, and listened carefully before signing decisions that changed lives. But once I drove through that cedar gate, the suit stayed in the truck, replaced by faded jeans, an old flannel shirt, and the same leather boots I had worn for years. Around here, I was simply the quiet neighbor with the old pickup truck who repaired his own fences and waved politely without saying much. That anonymity suited me perfectly. It also made me invisible to people who judged others by appearances alone. Willow Creek Estates had been built less than 5 years earlier on land bordering the eastern edge of my ranch. Large houses appeared almost overnight, each with matching mailboxes, perfectly trimmed lawns, and decorative stone entrances that looked expensive enough to belong outside a country club. The Homeowners Association promoted itself as a community dedicated to protecting property values, but during the first few months I noticed something else. Every new sign, every expanded flower bed, every freshly painted curb seemed to inch a little closer toward my property line. Survey stakes appeared where none had existed before. Temporary construction fencing lingered longer than necessary. Delivery trucks occasionally crossed onto my gravel drive before quickly turning around as though someone had assured them the land already belonged to the subdivision. I documented everything without saying a word. Photographs, dates, emails, county plats, receipts from licensed surveyors. Quiet habits developed. Over a lifetime of practicing law are difficult to turn off, even on a ranch. Most people prepare evidence after a conflict begins. I have always believed the smartest evidence is collected before anyone realizes there will be a dispute. Looking back now, I realize those peaceful mornings were never as ordinary as they seemed. Every chirping bird, every camera quietly recording above the barn, every page filed neatly inside my office cabinet would eventually become part of a story that Linda Whitmore believed she had complete control over. She thought she was watching an ordinary homeowner. She never imagined that the quiet man repairing fence posts every Saturday had been patiently watching her the entire time. Linda Whitmore had mastered the rare talent of making ordinary neighborhood meetings feel like courtroom proceedings where she was always the judge, the jury, and somehow the winning attorney. She was 55 years old, a successful real estate broker with perfectly styled silver blonde hair, an immaculate white luxury sport utility vehicle, and a smile polished enough to convince strangers she genuinely cared about the community. Longtime residents quietly knew better. She had been elected HOA President barely 6 months after moving into Willow Creek Estates, and ever since then every conversation somehow ended with another rule, another committee, another inspection, or another fine. The neighborhood newsletter featured her photograph so often that newcomers joked they were moving into Linda's town instead of a subdivision. The joke stopped being funny after people received their first violation notice. One family was cited because their basketball hoop remained visible after sunset. Another homeowner received 3 warnings because his mailbox paint was apparently 1 shade darker than the approved sample. An elderly widow was ordered to replace flower pots because they did not match the community's architectural vision. Most people paid the fine simply because arguing cost more time than surrendering. Linda understood something dangerous about power. Small victories make people believe they deserve larger ones. By the time I arrived, she had convinced herself that the HOA did not simply manage the neighborhood. She believed it defined reality. Our first conversation lasted less than 3 minutes. I was repairing a split fence rail near the eastern property line when I heard expensive tires rolling slowly across loose gravel. The scent of fresh asphalt drifted from ongoing construction inside the subdivision as Linda stepped out carrying a clipboard thick enough to resemble a legal file. Without introducing herself, she informed me that my fence interrupted the future aesthetic transition between the subdivision and the surrounding properties. She spoke with absolute certainty, as though she expected every sentence to become fact simply because she had spoken it aloud. I quietly explained that the fence had stood in exactly the same location since my father built it decades earlier, and that licensed survey records confirmed every inch of the property line. She smiled politely, wrote something on her clipboard, and replied that surveys could always be updated. That sentence stayed with me longer than she realized. During the following weeks, she found increasingly creative reasons to visit my gate. Sometimes she claimed contractors needed temporary access. Sometimes she insisted emergency vehicles required an alternate route. Other days, she arrived carrying glossy development maps showing landscaped walking trails that somehow crossed directly through my pasture before reconnecting with subdivision amenities. Each proposal came wrapped in cheerful language about community cooperation, shared values, and future growth. Each one quietly erased another piece of private property. I never argued. I simply thanked her for stopping by, declined each request, and made another dated entry inside my notebook after she drove away. I noticed something else as well. Every conversation ended with Linda becoming slightly more frustrated by my calm responses. She expected emotional reactions because emotional people make mistakes. Silence forced her to fill the empty space herself, and every extra sentence revealed a little more about how confidently she believed nobody would ever challenge her authority. Watching her drive away beneath a cloud of pale dust, I realized she had already crossed an invisible line. She simply had not reached the point where everyone else could see it yet. The first certified letter arrived on a Thursday afternoon tucked neatly inside my mailbox, its crisp white envelope standing out against the stack of seed catalogs and utility statements. The paper carried the unmistakable scent of fresh printer toner as I unfolded 3 pages of official-sounding language declaring that my Eastern Access Road now fell under temporary community oversight during an ongoing infrastructure enhancement project. According to Linda's carefully crafted explanation, every property owner was expected to cooperate for the greater good of Willow Creek Estates. There was only one problem. My ranch had never been part of Willow Creek Estates. I folded the letter, slipped it into a manila folder already labeled with the date, and finished repairing the loose hinge on my equipment shed before sunset. 2 days later, I found bright orange survey flags planted several feet inside my pasture. Fresh tire tracks carved through the morning dew, and someone had tied blue construction ribbon to one of my father's cedar fence posts, as though preparing it for removal. The metallic click of my camera shutter echoed softly while I photographed every flag from multiple angles before pulling out the county survey map from my truck. The measurements matched exactly what I already knew. The markers did not. By the following week, another notice appeared, this time announcing a $50 daily fine for refusing to maintain what the HOA now described as a shared community entrance corridor. The wording fascinated me. Every sentence avoided directly claiming ownership while quietly suggesting authority over land that did not belong to them. That kind of language never appears by accident. Someone spends time polishing each phrase until ordinary readers stop questioning the legal foundation beneath it. Linda understood presentation almost as well as she understood publicity. Soon decorative signs appeared near the subdivision entrance featuring artist renderings of future walking trails, ornamental lighting, and a welcoming stone monument positioned exactly where my old cedar gate stood. Curious neighbors slowed their cars to admire drawings of improvements that crossed property lines no developer had ever purchased. During one Saturday morning coffee run, a neighbor named Harold lowered his pickup window and apologized almost awkwardly. He admitted Linda had told residents that I had already agreed to donate part of my frontage in exchange for improved property values. I smiled, thanked him for being honest, and watched genuine confusion replace confidence across his face. Rumors travel quickly when nobody challenges them. Facts move more slowly, but they usually arrive with documentation. The escalation continued with remarkable precision. Contractors briefly parked equipment along my gravel drive before claiming they had received authorization. A private security patrol stopped near my gate one afternoon and politely asked whether I planned to register my vehicles with the association. Even delivery drivers began asking whether my address had recently been reassigned because new digital maps displayed an HOA entrance where my family gate had existed for decades. Every strange encounter became another photograph, another written note, another saved email, another timestamp quietly stored away. I never raised my voice. I never threatened anyone. I simply allowed every unnecessary decision to leave its own paper trail. Looking back now, Linda believed she was surrounding me with pressure from every direction until surrender became inevitable. What she never considered was that every letter she mailed, every sign she installed, every instruction she issued made the story far easier to tell once all the evidence finally reached the right courtroom. By the time the 4th certified letter arrived, I realized Linda had stopped trying to convince me and started performing for everyone else. The envelope landed with a dull slap against my front porch just after sunrise while the smell of damp cedar drifted across the ranch from a light overnight rain. I carried it inside, placed it beside the others, and continued making breakfast before opening it. Experience had taught me that paperwork never became more accurate simply because it was read immediately. This notice announced that the Homeowners Association had voted unanimously to suspend my access through what they now described as a regulated community corridor. They even included a deadline demanding I remove my own gate within 10 business days or face additional penalties. I read every line twice, not because I believed any of it, but because wording matters. Every sentence leaves fingerprints. Instead of responding, I scanned the letter, stored both digital and paper copies, and filed it beside the growing collection that already filled half a drawer in my office. Over the next several weeks, Linda became impossible to avoid. She seemed to appear whenever contractors visited my property, whenever delivery trucks arrived, or whenever neighbors happened to be outside. She always carried the same clipboard, wore the same polished smile, and spoke loudly enough for anyone nearby to hear. She repeatedly described me as an uncooperative landowner who refused reasonable community standards. I noticed she rarely spoke directly to me anymore. Instead, she performed for her audience. One Saturday afternoon, she organized what she called an informational neighborhood walk. Nearly 20 residents followed her along the subdivision trail, while she stopped near my fence and pointed toward my cedar gate like a tour guide explaining a historical landmark. From where I stood repairing an old water trough, I could hear fragments of her presentation drifting across the pasture. She claimed the entrance created unnecessary confusion for visitors. She suggested emergency responders might someday become delayed because of outdated property boundaries. She even hinted that county officials supported the association's long-term development plan. None of it was true. Still, people nodded because confidence often sounds convincing when nobody offers immediate correction. I simply kept tightening rusted bolts with my old wrench while the steady metallic clicks echoed through the quiet afternoon. Every few minutes I glanced toward the small security camera mounted beneath the barn roof. It captured every word clearly. A few days later, another surprise arrived. A private security company left a laminated notice attached to my gate informing me that future entry might require HOA authorization during community improvement activities. I almost laughed. The gate stood entirely on my property. Even the wooden post holding their plastic notice belonged to me. I photographed the sign before removing it carefully, making sure not to damage it. Evidence has greater value when preserved exactly as it was found. The strange part was never the paperwork or the signs. It was how calm I remained while everything escalated. Friends occasionally asked why I never confronted Linda publicly or demanded immediate intervention from county officials. I always gave the same answer. Some people reveal the truth only after they believe nobody is watching. Linda was still speaking. I was still listening. And with every passing day, the story she was writing grew more complete than anything I could have created myself. The morning everything changed began with the distant hum of tires rolling across wet pavement long before sunrise had burned away the mist hanging over my pasture. I had just finished feeding the horses when I noticed 3 unfamiliar sport utility vehicles slowing near the cedar gate instead of driving past. The air smelled of fresh rain and damp earth, and tiny drops of water still clung to the old chain stretched between the gateposts. Linda climbed out first, carrying another thick folder beneath one arm while speaking confidently into her phone. Behind her came 2 HOA board members, a private security supervisor, and several curious neighbors who had clearly been invited to witness what they expected would become a public victory. I quietly leaned against the fence, coffee warming my hands, and waited. Linda announced loudly enough for everyone to hear that the association had reached the end of its patience. According to her latest interpretation of the governing documents, I had ignored repeated directives, refused lawful inspections, and continued entering what she insisted had become regulated HOA property. The security supervisor stepped toward the gate holding another printed notice, hesitating only slightly before attaching it beside the lock. A few minutes later, the unmistakable sound of approaching sirens echoed across the open fields. 2 sheriff's cruisers turned onto the gravel drive, followed by a county vehicle that rolled to a stop behind them. Dust drifted slowly through the cool morning air as the deputies stepped out and approached with calm professionalism. Linda immediately began speaking before anyone else had the opportunity. She handed over her folder, pointed toward me, and repeated every accusation with complete confidence. The younger deputy accepted the documents and started reviewing them, while the senior deputy walked over to where I stood. His expression remained courteous, neither suspicious nor convinced. "Sir," he said, "we need to understand exactly what is happening here." I nodded, reached into my jacket pocket, and handed him my driver's license without another word. He glanced down at it almost absent-mindedly before his eyes stopped moving. For a brief second, the only sound was the wind brushing through the oak trees behind us. He looked back at the license, then at me, then quietly repeated my name to himself as though confirming something he already recognized. The younger deputy noticed the sudden silence and walked over. He read the identification, and his posture changed almost immediately. Neither man said anything dramatic. Neither looked surprised enough to draw attention. They simply exchanged a brief glance that experienced professionals understand without speaking. A moment later, the county vehicle door opened, and an older man wearing a county badge stepped out carrying a leather portfolio. He took only a few steps before spotting me across the gate. His face relaxed into a respectful smile. "Good morning, Your Honor," he said naturally, as though greeting me outside the courthouse on any ordinary weekday. The conversation around us stopped instantly. Linda's confident smile disappeared for the first time since I had met her. One of the board members lowered his phone. Another quietly folded the stack of violation notices beneath his arm. Even the private security supervisor looked uncertain about whether he should remain standing beside my gate. I slipped my license back into my wallet and looked toward the deputies. "Thank you for coming," I said calmly. "I believe it is finally time that everyone sees the complete record." The silence lasted only a few seconds, but it felt longer than every conversation Linda and I had shared over the previous months combined. The confidence that had filled the air moments earlier dissolved almost instantly, replaced by the soft rustle of papers shifting inside her folder and the distant chirping of birds that nobody seemed to notice anymore. I watched her eyes move from my face to the county official and back again, searching for some explanation that would restore the certainty she had carried into my driveway. She finally forced a nervous smile and cleared her throat. "Well, that does not change the fact that he violated HOA regulations," she said, trying to regain control of the conversation. I answered with the same calm voice I had used since the first day she walked onto my property. "That depends entirely on whether those regulations were ever lawful in the first place." The older deputy looked toward me. "Your Honor, how would you like to proceed?" I appreciated the question because it reminded everyone standing there that authority was never about raising your voice. It was about following the proper process. "Exactly the way the law requires," I replied. "No exceptions for anyone." I reached into my truck and removed a weathered leather portfolio that had remained behind the driver's seat for months. Inside were neatly organized copies of every certified letter, every photograph, every survey, every recorded date, every contractor invoice, every county property map, and every email the association had ever sent me. The paper edges had become slightly worn from careful handling, and the familiar scent of old files drifted into the cool morning air as I opened the binder on the hood of my pickup. I handed the deputies the original county survey first. It clearly established the property line that had existed for decades before the subdivision was ever approved. Next came dated photographs showing orange survey flags placed inside my ranch without permission. Then the certified notices demanding that I remove my own gate from land that had never belonged to the association. Finally, I produced printed screenshots from the security cameras mounted on my barn and beside the cedar entrance. Those cameras had quietly recorded every visit, every posted notice, every conversation conducted at my gate, and every temporary marker placed across my frontage. Linda had unknowingly helped create one of the most complete evidence files I had seen outside a courtroom. The county official reviewed several pages before looking toward the deputies. "Please preserve copies of everything presented today," he said. "Also request that the association retain all electronic communications, meeting minutes, financial records, and planning documents related to this property." His tone remained professional, but everyone understood what those instructions meant. This had stopped being a neighborhood disagreement. It had become a formal matter requiring careful review. Linda immediately protested that the board had acted in good faith, that every decision had been approved by committee, and that the community only wanted what was best for the neighborhood. Nobody interrupted her. Nobody argued. They simply listened while another deputy quietly noted each statement in his report. As I closed the leather portfolio, I looked once more at the old brass key resting beside it. My father used to tell me that strong fences keep honest people honest, but paperwork reveals who never intended to be honest in the first place. Standing there beside the same cedar gate he had built with his own hands, I realized his lesson had never been about fences at all. It had always been about patience, because the truth has a remarkable habit of arriving exactly when it is needed most. The review moved far faster than Linda expected because facts have a way of removing unnecessary arguments. Within 48 hours, the county requested every document connected to the subdivision expansion project, including board meeting minutes, contractor agreements, survey requests, financial approvals, electronic correspondence, and architectural plans. The association had proudly stored everything in cloud folders that several board members believed proved how organized they were. Instead, those files revealed a timeline that was impossible to ignore. The earliest planning sketches showed landscaped walking paths crossing my property months before anyone had ever approached me. Internal emails discussed the possibility that I would eventually give in rather than spend time challenging the project. One message even described my ranch as an isolated parcel that could probably be absorbed if enough public improvements surrounded it. Reading those words felt strangely calm rather than personal. They had never planned to negotiate. They had planned to exhaust me. Every new document fit perfectly beside the evidence already resting inside my leather portfolio. The county survey office confirmed that no revised boundary application had ever been approved. Planning officials verified that no public easement existed across my frontage. The private security company admitted it had acted solely on instructions provided by the homeowners association. Even the construction contractor acknowledged that temporary survey markers had been placed according to maps supplied by the board instead of official county records. Piece by piece, the entire story aligned without anyone needing to raise a single voice. Linda attempted to defend each decision by insisting that every action had been taken for the benefit of the neighborhood. Unfortunately for her, good intentions cannot replace legal authority. During one review meeting, investigators compared the association newsletters with the official board minutes. The difference was remarkable. Public announcements claimed unanimous approval for projects that internal records described only as future ideas. Residents had been told expansion plans were already authorized when no such approval had ever existed. Several homeowners later admitted they had supported assessments because they believed county agencies had endorsed everything Linda proposed. They had trusted the documents placed in front of them. The documents simply had not told the complete truth. The atmosphere inside Willow Creek Estates changed almost overnight. Neighbors who once hurried past my gate now slowed their vehicles, rolled down their windows, and quietly apologized for believing rumors they had never questioned. Harold stopped by one afternoon carrying a homemade peach pie baked by his wife. He stood awkwardly beside the cedar fence and admitted that many residents had assumed I was simply refusing to cooperate with harmless neighborhood improvements. I thanked him, accepted the pie, and reminded him that honest people can be misled when information arrives one sentence at a time instead of all at once. Meanwhile, Linda became noticeably quieter. The confident newsletters stopped appearing. Scheduled board meetings were postponed. The glossy artist renderings disappeared from the subdivision entrance without explanation. Even the decorative signs near my gate quietly vanished before sunrise one morning, leaving only pale outlines in the grass where their metal posts had stood. Standing beside the old cedar gate that evening, I watched the sunset spread across the pasture while the familiar breeze carried the scent of wild grass through the open fields. Months earlier, Linda had believed she was building a stronger association. She never realized she was carefully constructing the evidence that would eventually dismantle the illusion she had worked so hard to create. 3 weeks later, the final county review concluded exactly the way careful records usually do. Not with shouting, not with dramatic speeches, just with signatures, stamped findings, and official notices delivered one envelope at a time. The investigation determined that the Homeowners Association had repeatedly acted outside the authority granted by its governing documents while attempting to regulate property that had never fallen within its legal jurisdiction. Several board actions were declared invalid because they relied on inaccurate boundary representations and unauthorized enforcement efforts. The county required the association to withdraw every notice issued against my property, remove all references to my ranch from future development plans, and reimburse administrative costs connected to the improper enforcement campaign. Additional governance reviews were ordered before the association could approve any future expansion proposals. On a quiet Friday morning, I stood beside the same cedar gate where everything had begun. The cool autumn air carried the familiar scent of dry leaves, and the old brass key rested comfortably in my hand, polished smooth by decades of use. Across the road, a maintenance crew carefully removed the decorative signs that had once claimed the entrance belonged to the subdivision. The sound of socket wrenches clicking against steel bolts echoed softly through the morning while each metal post was lifted from the ground. They worked slowly, respectfully, leaving the grass far less damaged than when those signs had first appeared. A few neighbors stopped to watch from a distance. This time there were no whispered rumors, no phones raised to record a confrontation, and no speeches about community standards. There was only quiet acceptance that the truth had finally caught up with the story people had been told. Harold walked over with 2 paper cups of fresh coffee and handed one to me without saying much. After a long moment, he smiled and looked toward the open pasture. "Your father would probably be proud," he said. I nodded because there was nothing else that needed to be added. He was right. This land had never simply been about acreage. It represented promises kept across generations. Linda moved away several months later. I heard she returned to real estate in another county, although I never followed the details. I wished her no ill will. Courts exist to resolve disputes, not to settle personal scores. That distinction matters more than most people realize. Every once in a while, someone asks why I never revealed who I was during those first meetings, why I allowed months of unnecessary letters, inspections, and accusations to continue when I could have stopped them with a single sentence. The answer is simple. Respect for the law cannot depend on knowing the title of the person standing in front of you. If people obey rules only, after discovering someone holds authority, then they were never respecting the law in the first place. They were respecting power. There is a difference, and it is a difference worth protecting. As the last truck disappeared down the road, I unlocked the cedar gate once again. The old hinges gave their familiar gentle creak, followed by the satisfying click my father always loved to hear. The horses grazed peacefully beneath the oak trees. Sunlight settled across the pasture, and the breeze carried nothing except the sounds that had always belonged here. I slipped the brass key into my pocket, took one last look across the property, and smiled quietly to myself. Justice never needed to raise its voice on this ranch. It simply waited, gathered every fact with patience, and arrived exactly when the truth was ready to be heard.